In 2013, a group of researchers from Princeton University conducted an experiment that revealed something alarming. People under financial scarcity showed a drop of up to 13 IQ points just from being worried about money. It wasn't a matter of intelligence, laziness, or lack of discipline. It was the mental weight of scarcity acting like a cognitive shutdown. When the brain is exposed to constant worry, it switches to emergency mode. It shuts off higher functions like planning, focus, and analysis, and devotes everything to immediate survival. It's like living with a fire alarm blaring all the time. You're not relaxed, you're not creative, you're not rational. You're just trying to survive the now, and that's where the danger lies. Because scarcity doesn't just impact your wallet, it reshapes your mind. It alters your perception of risk, of time, of value, of yourself. You begin making bad decisions, you procrastinate, you feel guilty afterward. And worse, you start thinking you are the problem, but you're not. It's your brain operating under the silent and powerful influence of not having enough. And that anxiety becomes a cycle, a self-reinforcing loop. You make poor decisions because you're mentally exhausted, and those decisions keep you stuck in scarcity. It's an invisible behavioral addiction. Yes, scarcity is addictive. It hooks your attention, your focus, your self-confidence. It keeps you locked in the short term. It teaches you that dreaming long-term is dangerous. In this video, we'll expose this pattern. We'll tell the story of someone who went through this and nearly didn't escape. And most of all, we'll show you why escaping poverty isn't enough. You also have to escape the mindset it leaves inside you. This is CashPhrenia. And today, you'll understand how a lack of money can rewire your brain and keep you stuck even after the money arrives. His name is Rafael, and his story could be anyone. Anyone who grew up learning how to make miracles with little. Rafael came from a humble background. His mother was a house cleaner, his father absent. From a young age, he understood that money was a constant problem and a permanent emergency. By 14, he was already working at a small local market. He saved loose change, tracked every coin in an old notebook. By 17, he got a scholarship to college. By 23, he graduated. And at 25, he landed a job at a promising startup. But despite the achievement, Rafael couldn't relax. Even with a steady paycheck, he would wake up at night to check his bank account. He felt guilty buying anything non-essential, planned every expense with fear, and when there was money left over, he somehow managed to accidentally spend it. Online courses, electronics, subscriptions, small trips on credit. There was always a reason. And always at the end of the month, he ended up back where he started. It was as if life insisted on dragging him back to zero. But it wasn't life doing that to him, it was his mind. Rafael had escaped poverty, but poverty hadn't yet let go of him. Because no one tells you this. Scarcity leaves marks. It embeds itself in your thoughts, in your emotions, in the way you interpret the world. Over time, those patterns become identity. You get used to surviving with less, to solving everything on the fly, to equating peace with danger, to associating effort with worth. And when life starts offering more, you reject it, you sabotage it, you retreat, not by choice, but because your brain has learned that chaos is safer than stability. That's how scarcity becomes addictive. It makes you repeat the same story with different characters. You change jobs, but the anxiety remains. You earn more, but the guilt grows. You get opportunities, but you feel you're not ready. Deep down, what's addicted isn't your bank account. It's your mental model. In today's episode, we're diving into this cycle. We'll show how Rafael's rise hit invisible limits, how his fall was driven by decisions that seemed normal, and how the psychological error that trapped him is the same one that traps millions. Because the real trap of scarcity isn't the lack of money, it's what it does to the way you think. Rafael never had a choice. He didn't dream of becoming rich. He dreamed of surviving with just a little more dignity. And for a long time, that was enough. But when he landed the job at the startup, something shifted. The environment was different. The people seemed confident. They talked about investments, international trips, side hustles. It was a new world where scarcity wasn't the main topic of every day. At first, Rafael felt out of place. But over time, he began to adapt. He built a routine, saved part of his salary, opened an investment account. He was finally building what he always wanted: stability. And with that stability came a new feeling: pride. For the first time, Rafael wasn't just paying bills. He was planning his future. He started studying, took online courses on finance, productivity, and career growth. Set goals, created spreadsheets. It was as if he had discovered a version of himself that had always been hidden, suffocated by the urgency of survival. He began gaining visibility at work, took on small projects, and got promoted. And with the raise came the second moment of the rise: autonomy. For the first time, Rafael could say no to things. He had choices. He could breathe. He paid off all his mother's debts, took his nephews to the movies, bought a new phone without installments, went on a short trip with friends to the coast. And when he returned from that trip, something inside him broke. But he didn't know it yet. What seemed like the peak was actually the beginning of his self-sabotage. Because the more he achieved, the more he felt disconnected from his own story. Rafael began hearing internal voices. You're getting cocky. This isn't for you. Something bad's going to happen. Soon it'll all fall apart. He didn't tell anyone, but he lived in constant anticipation of collapse. And unconsciously, he started accelerating it. He began spending more, because now I can. Stopped checking his investments, I'll get to it later. Ignored credit card warnings. Started missing deadlines. On the outside, he was still competent Rafael. But on the inside, he was returning to a familiar place: chaos. And as contradictory as it seems, that chaos was comforting, because it was familiar. Rafael's brain, after years immersed in scarcity, didn't know how to operate in stability. And this is a crucial point for understanding the rise of someone who comes from lack. It almost always comes with guilt. Guilt for being too far from family's reality. Guilt for having access to things others don't. Guilt for starting to enjoy a life that, for years, seemed like an unreachable luxury. That kind of guilt isn't rational. It's learned, it's cultural, it's emotional. It's an echo of the survival mindset. And it was that guilt that began eating Rafael from the inside. It wasn't the lack of money, it was the lack of internal permission to hold on to money. He knew how to earn, but he didn't know how to remain there, because no one taught him how to sustain peace, only how to endure pain. This is one of the great tragedies of scarcity. It trains you to fight, but not to maintain. Rafael had beaten the external system. But the internal system, the one he'd carried since childhood, was still in control. And he had no idea how it would soon drag him back to the bottom. Again, Rafael's fall didn't happen all at once. It was quiet, fragmented, almost invisible. He was still smiling at work, still posting on Instagram, still answering friends with a cheerful "everything's great." But inside, everything was collapsing. The anxiety came back stronger. Not the kind of anxiety that shows itself in visible panic, but a constant restlessness. A feeling that he was living a life that wasn't really his, as if he were occupying a space on borrowed time. In practice, he began repeating past behaviors: impulse spending, missing deadlines, financial disorganization. But now, the consequences were bigger, because the higher you rise, the harder you fall. Rafael began missing payments, ignored emails from work, distanced himself from friends who had a stable financial life, and without realizing it, started sabotaging himself with surgical precision. He scheduled meetings and skipped them, turned down important projects with vague excuses, browsed job sites, not really looking for a job but hoping something would force a change. Deep down, he wanted to be pushed out. He wanted life to kick him back to where his mind believed he belonged. The zone of tension, of improvisation, of if it fails, it wasn't my fault, and then it happened. After a poorly delivered project and weeks of emotional absence, Rafael was let go. He listened to the manager's words with a calm that surprised even him. It felt like relief. Like everything finally made sense again. Chaos was back, and with it, the old Rafael. The days that followed were a return to familiar territory. Sleepless nights, sitting in the dark to save electricity, writing obsessive budgets in a notebook, declining invites, shutting down emotionally. It was as if his brain whispered, "Welcome back. This is safe. You know how to survive here." But that safety was an illusion. It was the kind of safety a person feels returning to a toxic relationship. You know it hurts, but at least it's familiar pain. And that's how scarcity works. It doesn't need to be in your bank account anymore. It just needs to be alive in your identity. Rafael had more resources than ever before. A network, skills, experience. But none of that mattered if deep down, he believed he didn't deserve to grow, that staying on top was wrong, that success without struggle was selfish. That silent belief built from childhood was the true saboteur. And here the cycle completes itself. Scarcity gives success, gives guilt, gives sabotage, gives scarcity again. Not from incompetence, but from emotional conditioning. Rafael had become a hostage to a mental script that distorted his self-image. Everything he achieved was temporary, because his subconscious acted like an inner thief. It would sneak in, take what was valuable, and drag him back to scarcity. The worst part? He thought it was just bad luck, that he was burnt out, that maybe it just wasn't for him. But the truth was something else. His brain had been trained for survival, and even in times of peace, it still reacted as if it were in a war zone. Rafael's mistake wasn't overspending, or losing his job, or missing out on opportunities. Rafael's mistake was not realizing the invisible game his mind was playing against him. A quiet, unconscious, yet incredibly powerful game, the game of emotional coherence. In psychology, there's a concept called cognitive dissonance. It's the discomfort we feel when we do something that contradicts the image we have of ourselves. And that's where the key lies. Rafael spent his life seeing himself as a fighter, someone who made things work on his own, someone who survived no matter what. That identity, built over decades, became comfortable, even if painful. It was the place where he felt coherent. And when he started succeeding, earning more, having choices, that internal image started to crack. He didn't see himself as someone prosperous. He saw himself as someone who gets by. And when the external reality no longer matched his internal identity, his brain stepped in, not to adapt the identity, but to destroy the reality. Because keeping the old identity intact, even if it's limiting, is easier than rebuilding it. That's why so many people sabotage their success. Why so many promising relationships fall apart. Why careers stagnate precisely at the turning point. It's not a lack of intelligence. It's an unconscious attachment to the old narrative. It's the mind saying, this version of life isn't you. And if it's not you, then something's wrong. And so comes the urge to go back. Back to the struggle. Back to the urgency. Back to the discomfort you know by heart. That's how scarcity becomes addictive. It turns into a familiar emotional state, and everything that's familiar becomes a reference. It becomes home. It becomes identity. That's why, even after leaving poverty, so many people still behave as if they're stuck in it, because the body leaves scarcity, but the mind stays. This is the cruelest psychological error of scarcity. Convinces you that discomfort is your safe zone. Rafael didn't know how to handle stability because he never learned to see it as safe. He didn't know how to succeed without guilt. How to sustain progress without fear. How to allow himself to enjoy good things without bracing for the worst. And here lies the final trap. Scarcity teaches you to distrust peace. To believe that something too good must come at a high price, that you can't have it all, that if you rise too high, the fall will be harder. These beliefs aren't just phrases we've heard. They're mental programs that create invisible boundaries. And the brain, it's efficient. If you teach it that pain is part of your identity, it will seek that pain. Even when everything is fine, Rafael didn't need more discipline. He needed a new emotional operating system. One that said, you can have peace and progress. You can maintain without suffering and grow without guilt. But no one ever told him that. And until that happens, the cycle continues. The mind repeats. The body obeys. And the future becomes just a rewound version of the past. Now that you've made it this far, I want to ask you a direct question. What is your relationship with scarcity? Is it in your bank account or in the way you think? Maybe you've never noticed, but many of your daily decisions, what you buy, what you avoid, what you delay, have less to do with logic and more to do with emotional programming, fear of not having enough, the feeling that now's not the time, the belief that you have to suffer to deserve. These patterns repeat silently, generation after generation, and unless we bring them to light, they will continue shaping lives, even when the numbers change. So here's the invitation. Write in the comments. What is one belief about money or success you inherited that you now realize may be holding you back? By naming that belief, you take the first step. You break the cycle of silence. You challenge the invisible story you were handed. And maybe, without realizing it, you'll help someone who's been living the same emotional prison. Here at CashPhrenia, we don't talk about money just as numbers. We talk about money as a mirror, as a symptom, as a mental code. Every episode is an attempt to decode what's hidden behind our most automatic behaviors. If this message resonated with you, if something inside clicked, consider subscribing. It's not because we have all the answers, but because we're asking the questions almost no one else dares to ask. Maybe that's what's been missing. someone to tell you that you're not stuck because you're weak, but because you were conditioned to believe you can't break free. The good news, you can. And the escape begins right here. Rafael didn't fail, simply repeated flawlessly the emotional script he had learned since childhood. He learned that success without struggle is suspicious, that having and keeping money is for other people, that fighting is noble, but peace is dangerous. And that silent learning shaped every one of his decisions, even the ones he thought were conscious. What you need to understand, what maybe no one ever told you, is this: scarcity is not just an external condition. It's a mental state, an emotional habit, a cognitive pattern. If you don't confront it, it doesn't matter how much you earn, achieve, or grow. You'll always find a way to return to the place where your mind believes you belong. But this can change. You can reprogram that pattern. You can train your brain to understand that growth doesn't have to hurt. Here are 3 practical lessons based on everything we've explored. 1. Identify your internal narrative about money. Write down everything you heard, felt, or experienced related to money in childhood. Phrases like "money doesn't bring happiness," "the rich are all corrupt," "it's not for us." These ideas define what you believe is possible. Now say them out loud and ask, do they still serve me? If not, let them go, or rewrite them. 2. Observe your reactions to success. What do you feel when things start going well? Do you relax, or sabotage yourself? Do you allow yourself to enjoy, or do you feel guilty? A's are emotional breadcrumbs. They reveal where your mind is still trapped in the past. 3. Build a new emotional identity. You're not just someone who survives. You can be someone who thrives with calm, stability, with emotional safety. But for that, you need to give yourself internal permission to become that version. It's not just about changing your income, it's about changing your self-image. Rafael didn't need to hustle harder. He needed to allow himself to keep what he earned. Without guilt, without fear, without sabotage. And so do you. Because in the end, the greatest form of wealth is being able to live in peace. Without feeling like you're betraying who you used to be. Now that you've made it this far, I want to ask you a direct question. What is your relationship with scarcity? Is it in your bank account or in the way you think? Maybe you've never noticed, but many of your daily decisions, what you buy, what you avoid, what you delay, have less to do with logic and more to do with emotional programming, fear of not having enough, the feeling that now is not the time, the belief that you have to suffer to deserve. These patterns repeat silently, generation after generation, and unless we bring them to light, they will continue shaping lives, even when the numbers change. So here's the invitation. Write in the comments. What is one belief about money or success you inherited that you now realize may be holding you back? By naming that belief, you take the first step. You break the cycle of silence. You challenge the invisible story you were handed. And maybe, without realizing it, you'll help someone who's been living the same emotional prison. Here at CashPhrenia, we don't talk about money just as numbers. We talk about money as a mirror, as a symptom, as a mental code. Every episode is an attempt to decode what's hidden behind our most automatic behaviors. If this message resonated with you, if something inside clicked, consider subscribing. Not because we have all the answers, but because we're asking the questions almost no one else dares to ask. Maybe that's what's been missing. Someone to tell you that you're not stuck because you're weak, But because you were conditioned to believe you can't break free, the good news, you can. And the escape begins right here.